In the year 1625, in a field near the old Chinese capital of Xi'an, workers dug up a great slab of black stone, nearly 3 meters tall. At the top of it was carved a cross. But the cross was rising out of a lotus flower, wreathed in curling clouds, like some treasure of a Buddhist temple. The face of the stone was covered in dense columns of Chinese characters, and down its edges ran a second script that no one in China could read, the looping letters of Syriac, the language of the churches of distant Mesopotamia. The stone told a story that both Europe and China had completely forgotten. That almost 1,000 years before any Western missionary, Christianity had already reached the heart of China, welcomed by an emperor, its scriptures translated in the imperial library. This was not the Church of Rome. It was a different Christianity, one that had turned away from the West and walked east, along the caravan roads of the Silk Road. It once stretched from Baghdad all the way to Beijing. And then it vanished so completely that when Europe finally read this stone, many refused to believe it had ever existed at all. This is the story of the forgotten church, the Church of the East, and of the cross that learned to stand upon a lotus. To understand the stone, you first have to forget the map of Christianity you think you know. We tend to imagine the early faith spreading outward from Jerusalem to Rome, and from Rome to the rest of Europe. But there was another stream, flowing in the opposite direction, east, into Asia. And for 1,000 years, it may have covered more of the earth than the church in the West. Its story turns on a single great quarrel. In the year 431, at the Council of Ephesus, the bishops of the empire fell out over how to describe the nature of Christ, how the divine and the human met in one person. The losing side was condemned. Its followers, who looked to the teacher Nestorius, were driven out, and ever after their enemies would call them by his name, Nestorians. It was a label fixed on them from the outside. They simply called themselves the Church of the East. And east is where they went, beyond the reach of Rome, into the rival empire of Persia. There, near the twin cities of Seleucia and Ctesiphon, and later beside the new city of Baghdad, they built their own center, under their own patriarch. They prayed not in Latin or Greek, but in Syriac, a form of Aramaic, the everyday language that Jesus himself had spoken. Cut off from the Christian West, they did something the Western Church never managed. They looked at the great trade roads running east, into Asia, and they followed them. They planted bishops in Arabia, and among the ancient Christians of southern India. They reached up onto the steppe, into the lands of the Turkic nomads. While the Church of the West turned inward, this church turned outward, and made the Silk Road into a road for souls. And the far end of that road led to the richest prize of all. In the year 635, a small party of travelers came down out of the western mountains and reached the gates of Chang'an. Chang'an, today's Xi'an, was then the capital of Tang Dynasty China, and one of the largest, most cosmopolitan cities on earth. Behind its walls lived 1 million people, Persian merchants, Turkic soldiers, Indian monks, traders from half of Asia, crowded along its great avenues. Into that city walked a monk, remembered by the Chinese as Alopen, carrying scriptures written in Syriac. He had come thousands of kilometers, across deserts and mountains, from the churches of Persia, and against all odds, he was not turned away. The emperor, Taizong, was a confident and curious ruler, master of an empire open to the world. He had the foreign monk brought into the imperial library, and ordered his strange books translated into Chinese. And in the year 638, he issued a decree. The teaching, he said, was helpful to all beings, and might be freely practiced in his realm. A monastery was founded in the capital, and monks were appointed to serve it. In Chinese, the new faith took a new name. They called it Jingjiao, the luminous religion, the religion of bright light. They called it the luminous religion of Daqin being the old Chinese name for the far west, the land of Rome. But to make a religion born by the river Jordan speak to China, the monks had to borrow the only sacred words their neighbors already knew. They reached for the language of the Buddhist temple and the Taoist shrine, speaking of their God, their saints, their salvation, in words shaped by monks and sages. A faith born at the edge of the Mediterranean had walked 7,000 kilometers, and was learning to speak Chinese in order to survive. For the next century and a half, the luminous religion lived under the protection of the Tang. It never became a faith of the masses, but it was tolerated, and at times honored, in the most powerful empire on earth. And as it settled in, something remarkable happened to its art. The cross began to rest upon the lotus, the sacred flower of the Buddha, framed by the drifting clouds of the Taoists. a Western symbol of death and resurrection, growing from an Eastern symbol of purity and rebirth, on the same carved stone. The monks made themselves useful. Some served as physicians, some as translators, some as advisors at court. One of them rose higher than any. His name was Yisa, a Christian from Bork, in Central Asia. When the Tang dynasty was nearly torn apart by the great revolt of An Lushan, Yisa served the loyal general Guodiza Yi, helping to hold the empire together. For this, he was rewarded with rank and honors, a Christian, decorated by the court of China. And in the year 781, the church set its story in stone. It raised a great tablet in the capital, to record the spread of the Luminous religion through China. This was the stone that would one day be dug from a field near Xi'an. It was written in 2 languages at once, Chinese characters down the face, Syriac along the edges. It named the emperors who had favored the faith. It told the story of Alopen's arrival. It set down, in careful words, what these Christians believed. And it listed the names of the clergy, Persian and Chinese names together, the roll call of a church most of the world would forget. On a single slab in Chang'an, for the first time and almost the last, a Western faith was carved in the script of China and the language of Jesus, and then left to wait for the dark. Because the empire that had sheltered the church was beginning to turn. By the middle of the 9th century, the Tang dynasty was weakening, its treasury drained, its confidence gone. And the court looked for someone to blame. Its eye fell on the Buddhist monasteries, enormously rich, holding vast lands and tax-free monks. In the year 845, the Emperor Wu Dezong launched one of the great persecutions in Chinese history, against Buddhism. Tens of thousands of temples were torn down, and hundreds of thousands of monks and nuns forced back into ordinary life. And the decree swept up the foreign religions with it, the Christians, the Manichaeans, the Zoroastrians, all told to give up their robes. The blow had been aimed at Buddhism. But the small Luminous religion, which had always leaned on the court and on foreign merchants, could not survive being caught in its path. Its monasteries closed. Its foreign clergy were expelled or sent home. And the great stone tablet, with its cross and its lotus, was taken down and buried in the earth. Whether to save it, or simply lost as the monastery fell, no one now knows. It would lie underground for nearly 800 years. In the year 907, the Tang dynasty collapsed for good. Decades later, a monk of the Church of the East, sent from the West to check on the faithful, reported back what he had found. In China, he said, the religion was extinct. A faith once carved in stone by order of an emperor had vanished from China so quietly that no one could even record the day it died. And yet the Church of the East did not die. Its greatest age was still ahead of it, and it would come not from the cities, but from the open grasslands of the steppe. Out among the Turkic and Mongol tribes, the missionaries had been at work for centuries, and whole peoples had taken up the faith. The Kyrits, the Naimans, the Ongud, by the chronicles, an entire Kyrite kingdom was baptized along with its Khan. So that when Genghis Khan forged his empire, Christianity was already inside his own family. Powerful Christian women stood at the center of the Mongol court, princesses like Sorghaktane Beki, mother of 3 great Khans, and Dokuz Kayetun, the Christian queen of Persia's Mongol ruler. Far away, the crusading kings of Europe caught rumors of these Christian lords in the East. And out of those rumors they built a legend, Prester John, a mighty Christian priest-king somewhere beyond the Muslim world, who would one day march to their rescue. The kingdom of Prester John was a dream. But the Christian tribes that fed the dream were entirely real. And one man embodied just how far this church now reached. His name was Rahban Bar Soma. He was a monk of the Church of the East, born near Beijing, of Ongud stock, a Christian from the eastern edge of Asia. With a younger companion, he set out west on pilgrimage toward Jerusalem. His companion would never make it home. He was chosen instead as patriarch of the whole Church of the East. And Bar Soma himself was sent on an even stranger errand, as an ambassador, from a Mongol ruler, to the kings of Europe. In the year 1287, this monk from China sailed west, the mirror image of Marco Polo, an Asian traveler come to see the strange land of the Franks. He was received by the emperor in Constantinople. He celebrated the liturgy in Rome. He met Philip IV in Paris, and Edward of England at Bordeaux. In Rome, the cardinals pressed him to recite his creed, and were astonished to hear the condemned faith of Nestorians spoken by an envoy from the far side of the world. It was the high water mark. And then the tide went out, all at once. The Mongol Empire broke apart. Its rulers in Persia turned to Islam. The Black Death swept the trade roads, and the armies of Timur shattered what remained. A church that had stretched from Baghdad to Beijing, that had counted queens and ambassadors and a legend of its own, pulled back to where it had begun. It shrank into a scattering of villages in the mountains of Mesopotamia, and all but disappeared from the memory of the world. Which is why, when the Black Stone came out of that field near Xi'an in 1625, it landed like a message from the dead. The Jesuit missionaries who read it could hardly believe what it said, that Christianity had stood in the Chinese capital 9 centuries before them. In Europe, many were sure it had to be a forgery, invented by the Jesuits to smooth their own way into China. But it was real. In time its words were copied and printed across Europe, and the forgotten church was remembered again. The stone stands today in Xi'an, in a museum named for its forest of ancient tablets, the cross still rising from its lotus, at the very top. And the church itself was never quite extinguished. Its heirs survive, scattered around the globe, as the Assyrian Church of the East. For most of 1,000 years, Christianity was as much an Asian religion as a European one, traveling on the feet of camels, preaching in Chinese, worshipping beneath a cross that grew from a flower. We think we know when and how the faith reached the East. A stone buried for 8 centuries says it was there long before, and then was gone. Even the largest worlds can vanish, until nothing is left but a single line of writing that no one can still read. In the next video, we leave the roads of the land for the sea, to a sunken port on the coast of southern India, where temples were carved straight from the living rock to face the ocean, and legend tells of a whole city the waves swallowed whole. That's the story of Mahabalipuram, the port that ruled Noshan. Subscribe so you don't miss it.